morning, colleagues. It's a pleasure to have you all today on the International Conference of Academic Integrity and Plagiarism. It's a real pleasure having you all here today. In the meantime, that our colleague Brigitte is getting prepared with her presentation, I would like to welcome you all. It's a real pleasure to have important colleagues presenting today. As well, we always have some technical issues, and we apologize for any inconvenience. And we hope that you will enjoy the conference. We're having actually another conference in 1 month on November 15th. However, will be only in Spanish, and we will have it soon translated into English, and you will be able to hear it soon. So we hope that you will enjoy it as well. We are also translating the conference that we had in September, so you will have the opportunity to watch the conference on OpenCiencia YouTube channel. So I would like to welcome Brigitte, and we have prepared a presentation from one of our colleagues. So I'm going to deploy the presentation. It's actually one of our colleagues from OpenCiencia, Marlene Svela, and she's going to present Brigitte.
Good afternoon, colleagues. OpenCiencia acknowledges the branches of academic integrity in the scholarly publishing domain. Plagiarism is one of them. Fife, in 2019, pointed out that the scholarly works have been protected in the UK since the first Copyright Act in 1710. However, Dodds, in 2018, indicated that the copyright landscape has changed in academic publishing, having more works published with open access licenses. Therefore, it's relevant to know the role of licensing on plagiarism and copyright infringement. We have invited an expert on this topic, Brigitte Vezina from Creative Commons, and she is our first presenter in this conference. She works at Creative Commons as the Director of Policy, and she drives Creative Commons copyright policy and advocacy activities. She holds a bachelor degree in law from the University of Montreal and a master's of law from Georgetown University. The term LLM before her name stands for Legum Magister, which is Latin for Master of Laws. She has been a member of the Bar of Quebec since 2003, and she is also a fellow at the Canadian think tank Centre for International Governance Innovation. Before joining Creative Commons, she worked for a decade as a legal officer in the Traditional Knowledge Division at the World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva, where she dealt with IP issues related to cultural heritage. Her past experience includes work in the cultural enterprise and copyright section at the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization in Paris, and with the Montreal-based IP law firm Rubik. Afterwards, she ran her own consultancy, advising Europeana, Spars Europe, and others on copyright matters. She is passionate about all things spanning culture, arts, handcraft, traditions, fashion, and of course copyright law and policy. She gets a kick out of tackling the fuzzy legal and policy issues that stands in the way of access, use, reuse, and remix of culture, information, and knowledge. She's a globetrotter. She grew up living in 8 countries across North America, Africa, and Europe. However, Montreal is where she proudly comes from. She is currently located in Hague in the Netherlands. She is today with us presenting on the topic called Creative Commons, licenses, and plagiarism. Please welcome Bridget.
Thank you, Marlene. I really appreciate your effort recording the video. It was excellent. So we welcome Brigitte with the topic Creative Commons licenses and plagiarism. So you can unmute yourself, please, Brigitte.
Yes,
And
hello.
hi, how are you? Well,
So I will try to, I
that's
think,
correct. Yes, that's right. So there you go.
great. All right, well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation and for this very kind introduction. As the title of this presentation indicates, we'll look into how the creative licenses interplay with the issue of plagiarism. So I'll go first into what plagiarism is and what other types of academic fraud are present in academia. We'll then look into what the differences are between plagiarism and copyright infringement, and see how the licenses are actually a tool based on copyright law and are restricted to that system. We will look at the pros and cons and the warnings about using Creative Commons to try to tackle plagiarism. And at the end, we'll see if you have any questions that I haven't addressed. I will be able to take them. So first, I won't spend too much time on this because this is not my area of expertise, but I could imagine that there are different kinds of academic fraud. And just to give you a short overview, there's all kinds of cheating going on when people are making dishonest claims about their publications or their writings. It can also take the form of simple copying. So when someone copies the outputs, especially the research articles from another source, and doesn't cite the source and claims it as its own. There's also plagiarism, which can have a very specific definition, but without entering into any technicalities here. Plagiarism is when someone publishes something without attributing the correct source. So claiming that the content is of its own without disclosing that it actually comes from a different source and not mentioning that source. And then we also witnessed the phenomenon of essay mills. I don't know if you're familiar with that, when students will request the services of a ghostwriter to write their essays. So they will seek the services of companies or individuals that offer a service of writing the essay for the student, of course, at a price, but without ever disclosing that the student never wrote that essay themselves. It was written by someone else. So all these are very troubling and can be very difficult to tackle in the academia. And we will see what Creative Commons licenses can and cannot do to address those. So moving on to the difference between plagiarism and copyright infringement. Like I said, plagiarism is something that in most jurisdictions sits outside of the copyright system. So it's not considered a legal infringement. It's more of a moral or an ethical issue. So it will not be dealt under copyright law. And I say this knowing that there are some jurisdictions where it is, and it can even be considered a criminal offense. But generally, in most copyright laws, there is no provision regarding plagiarism, which is, like I said, simply failing to mentioning the source and claiming that that content originates from the author. Copyright infringement is can be much more complex, much more multifaceted. Basically, copyright grants a bundle of rights to the creators. So as a writer, if I publish an article, for example, I will have all sorts of rights associated with that work. So the article is considered a copyrighted work. And these rights can be separated from each other. So I can keep some of the rights, I can license some of the rights out. But the most common ones are the right of reproduction. So I, as the creator, I am the only one who is allowed to make reproductions of my work. So if someone else wants to reproduce my work, they have to ask for my permission. So we can consider that copying, like I mentioned in the first slide, is an act of reproduction. So if I copy something substantial, I will have to ask for permission. Of course, there are some exceptions to that. There's a quotation exception. There are also exceptions in the context of criticism, review, sometimes illustration, or in the context of research or education. So there might be some circumstances where someone doesn't need to ask for permission to make a reproduction, but these are usually defined in the law, so either in the legislation or in the case law. In the United States, the main framework for exceptions is fair use. So you often hear about fair use, and that will be decided by the courts whether a case of reproduction constitutes fair use or not. So that's the right of reproduction. There's also the right of adaptation, which means that you can turn a work into an adapted work, something else. So the most easy example is to say, I will adapt a novel into a movie, or I will adapt a theater play into a movie, or I will turn a photograph into a sculpture. So it's still using a work, but not just copying it, but turning it into something else, another copyright work. There's also the right of communication to the public. So that will be when, for example, you can create a work, you can write an article, and you are allowed as the author to communicate it online, for example, to publish it on a website, to share it publicly on mailing lists, for example, all sorts of ways that you communicate it to the public, etc., etc. There can be up to 20 different rights. We also have to talk about moral rights. So what I just listed are called economic rights, but there's a different category of rights which are called moral rights, and they are within copyright. So it's not like moral or ethics that would fall outside of copyright. Within copyright, there are two main rights that we refer to as moral rights. And the first one is the right of attribution, or the right of paternity. And that is the right for an author to be associated with their work and to make sure that they are referred to as the author when their work is used. So as the author of an article, you have the right that your name will feature every time that your article is published. Your name will feature near the title or in association with the work. That is your right of attribution. And also that means that others have to mention you whenever they use the work. So there's an obligation for others to, whenever they use the work within reason, there are some limitations when it's not reasonable to require that, but others who use your work have to provide you the source and cite your name. The second type of moral right is called the right of integrity. And that is the right to prevent modifications to the work that would cause prejudice to the honor or reputation of the author. So no one can make changes to your work which would damage your reputation or your honor. And we see that often in the context of visual arts where a statue, let's say, that was commissioned by a city, is placed in a public space, and then the city decides to remove that statue and put it in a different place, or to make modifications to that statue, the right of integrity will kick in. That means that the author will be able to oppose those changes if it can show that there's been some damage to their reputation or their honor. So that's a very quick and cursory overview of what copyright infringement is. In the United States, in order to prove copyright infringement of the right of reproduction, you have to prove two things. One is that the person infringing had access to the work. So you have to prove that it's indeed from your work that the infringing work is being copied, and that there's substantial similarity. So it's close enough, it's similar enough that we can say, aha, indeed, it is copying. It doesn't have to be 100%. There can be a few changes, but if it's sufficiently similar, it will be considered an infringement of the right of reproduction. Now, where are we going next? We're going to the copyright licenses. So what Creative Commons did is that instead of the default where the author retains all their rights, so all rights reserved, and when we say all rights, we refer to all these rights that are in the bundle of rights, like reproduction, adaptation, communication to the public, etc. When all those rights are reserved, that means that anyone wanting to use the work has to ask permission from the author. And with Creative Commons licenses, the author gives permission to everyone in any context to use the works according to the terms of the license. So it's much easier for the author, who doesn't have to answer requests for using the work, because the license is given away to everyone. It's a public license, it's universal. So anyone coming across that work that sees that it's identified with a Creative Commons license can use the work according to the terms of the license. And so the licenses are, like I said, a very easy way for authors to share their work more broadly, more openly, more freely than what the default copyright law would permit. And we will see that there are different kinds of licenses. Oh yes, no, I think we can go over this. There's different kinds of Creative Commons licenses. And here I think it's important to recall that the Creative Commons licenses are copyright licenses. So they only license out the rights that are given through the copyright law. And they're designed to give creators or authors of all types of work a simple way to grant public permission to use their works. Sorry, I think I went back instead of forward. I wanted to show you the different types of licenses. So there are up to 6 types of Creative Commons licenses. Actually, no. There are 6 types, and there are 4 main features. So depending on what the author wants to allow others to do, they will be able to choose from different licenses, from extremely open and completely free, or with a bit more restrictions to still keep a bit of control over the work. And here you see them from the least restrictive at the top to the most restrictive at the bottom. And each of the 6 Creative Commons licenses are made up of, or can be made up to 4 different elements. The first element is the buy. So it's what you encounter when you see something that's licensed CC BY. And this BY refers to attribution, the right of attribution that I just mentioned as one of the 2 moral rights. So yeah, that means that anyone using that work can do whatever they want with it, so long as they attribute, so as they cite the name of the author, the title, etc., all the information necessary to identify the work and the author. The other condition within the CC license suite is share alike, SA. And that means that any works that are created on the basis of a work, the CC license SA, have to have the same licensing requirement. So if you use some content, a work, an article, let's say, that's licensed CC by SA, that means that any changes, any adaptations that you make of that work also have to have the same license. So you will have to have, you will have to apply a CC BY or CC BY SA onto your work. If the initial original work is licensed CC BY NC, and we will see a bit more detail what NC mean, non-commercial SA, that means that if you adapt that work and create something new, you will have to license it also CC BY NC or NC SA. So that's what the SA means. That means that if you create something on the basis of a work, you will have to share it under the same conditions as the original one. Now, the third type of condition is NC, which I just mentioned, non-commercial. That means that you allow any kind of use of the work, except when it's for commercial purposes, then it's not allowed under the license, and anyone who wants to use it commercially has to come to the author and ask for permission. And the fourth one, and the last one, is ND, that stands for non-derivatives. And that means that you are not allowed to create adaptations or derivatives, as they are called in US copyright law. So that means that you cannot create and share works that are adaptations of the original. Now, that is often used for documents that are not meant to be modified, like a charter, for example. You wouldn't want to allow people to modify it because it could cause confusing, because the rules have to be set and cannot be changed by anyone. So that would be one example where the ND component is important. And then we have two public domain tools. So now I just described all the licenses, but in addition to the licenses, we have what we call tools, which allow us to mark material that's not protected by copyright at all, that is in the public domain. And one of the copyright tools is called the public domain mark. And that's not a license, it's just a label that we can apply on something that we are 100% sure that it's in the public domain worldwide. So everywhere in the world, if there were any rights over that work, they have expired, and we are absolutely certain that that work is in the public domain, we can mark it with the public domain mark. The other tool there is called the CC0, and that's a public domain dedication tool. And that's when a work is in copyright, so it is currently protected, but the author, creator, decides to waive all their rights. So they don't want to claim any rights, not even the right of attribution, and they dedicate their work to the public domain. That means that anyone can do anything without having to abide by any condition and ask for any permission. It's just as if the work was never protected. So that's a very quick overview of the licenses. Right. So what we've seen is that we've witnessed a trend whereby researchers publishing their articles were trying to control and preempt cases of plagiarism by applying restrictive licenses, especially ND, because that prevents any adaptations. And so they thought, if we prevent any adaptations, it will preserve the integrity of my research output. No one will be able to modify it. People will have to cite me again. And so that's why I will be able to have more control and preserve the integrity of my research outputs. And the problem is with using these restrictive licenses is that, yes, it does prevent adaptations, but that can actually do more harm than good, because not only are you maybe in some way preventing people from adapting it in ways that could be negative for you, but more importantly, you are preventing people from adapting it in ways that would be extremely beneficial for you as the author, but also for the entire academic community and the public in general, who would be able to access that information, that knowledge, in a much easier way. So when you publish something using ND, non-derivative, you don't allow people to adapt it to a different audience, for example. So some scientific papers can be extremely technical and have a lot of jargon and be completely inaccessible to audiences outside of that field. And what the right of attribution does is what putting an ND condition on that license means that you don't allow anyone to adapt the text in order to reach different audiences. And that's a pity, because it creates a barrier to access to knowledge from people who are not within that close circle of experts. It also prevents it from being translated in other languages, because translation is part of the right of adaptation. So that means that because most of the scientific or research output is being written in English, that means that for people who do not speak English, that remains inaccessible. So it's also a barrier that we think is unnecessary and actually damages the visibility and the accessibility of the knowledge that's contained within the academic publications. It also prevents others from updating it if there's been a development in the literature, if there's been a development based on new discoveries. That material cannot be updated because the non-derivative clause prohibits that without first asking for. So we see that there's actually more downsides to using a non-derivative clause than there are benefits for the author. Like I said, I think I mentioned one of those, two of those. It prevents translations, it prevents adaptations, and now I could also mention that it prevents text and data mining, because in some laws, the activity of conducting text and data mining can be restricted by copyright. If it's not allowed under an exception under copyright and the material is licensed with a Creative Commons license, the person using the data to conduct text and data mining will have to respect the terms of the license. That means that having an ND condition on it will be extremely complicated and will really pose some problems when the time comes to publish the results of the text and data mining, because that may be considered an adaptation of the data that was mined. And then what I would like to emphasize is that even though the more restrictive licenses are not the right way to control plagiarism, because anyways, plagiarism falls outside of copyright. So you cannot control something with a copyright license if it's not within copyright law, it will be ineffective. So even though I said that, there are some built-in safeguards within the most open of the CC licenses that could help minimize and neutralize the risk of plagiarism or attacks on their integrity. First is that all the licenses, so not the public domain tools, but all the 6 licenses require attribution. So the element by is in every other license, CC by SA, CC by ND, CC by NC, CC by NCND, CC by NCSA, etc. The by element is always there. That means that anyone using will always have to attribute the source. It's mandatory, otherwise it's a violation of the license and it's copyright infringement. So that's a very strong safeguard to make sure that people comply with the license and attribute the author whenever the work is used. There's also a very clear statement within the text of the license that attribution does not mean endorsing the views. So when someone creates new material on the basis of a CC license work, they are acknowledging that any changes or any views that are expressed in their adapted material is not necessarily the one of the original work. So it protects the original author from being associated with views that would be expressed in material that was adapted from their own. So if an article is used in an adapted article, the second article has to make it clear that the views are only of from them and are not necessarily endorsed by the ones who wrote the original article. And then there's another obligation within the license that if any changes are made to a work, they have to be indicated. So someone has to show where they have made changes and explain that these are changes and that they were not in the original. So that way, that kind of dissociates the author of the original work from any changes that were made subsequently. And that's all within the basic CC BY requirements. I think this brings me to the end. Oh no, there's just one last point. Right. So as I mentioned before, the Creative Commons licenses, they are built on top of copyright law. So they operate within the the copyright system, and they do not address other areas of the law. So you cannot use a Creative Commons license to address privacy rights or publicity rights or image rights. Or other types of rights or ethical or moral considerations like plagiarism. So you cannot use a tool that's been designed to allow a more flexible approach to sharing works based on copyright law to address other policy areas or other concerns that would arise from a different legal or moral framework. They only operate within copyright. So that's just a summary of what I already explained, that I think that using restrictive licenses to fight plagiarism will actually lead to more harm than good, because they will limit far more good uses than they will actually restrict bad ones. That copyright tools are not the right tools to tackle or police plagiarism, because plagiarism falls outside of the copyright system. And it really can hinder the dissemination of research and of knowledge, because you are erecting barriers when you use an ND or a more restrictive license. You are limiting access and potential reuses of the work outside of a very restrained, very limited framework. That's again a summary of what I just said, that CC BY or CC BY SA contain enough safeguards. The ones I mentioned, like the fact that attribution is required, that any changes have to be identified, and that any new views expressed in the adapted material need to be dissociated from the original author. And we also recommend addressing plagiarism through other existing rules. Often universities or research institutions will have their own code of ethics, they will have their own codes of conduct, they will have their own ethical frameworks that deal with issues of plagiarism. That is not governed under copyright law, so that cannot be addressed through the licenses. Right, and I think that these norms and rules and codes of conducts are to be determined, to be adopted by each institution, how they want to handle plagiarism. So if you want to take a deeper dive in these issues, because there might be some issues that I skipped over a bit quickly, There's a blog post that I wrote addressing these issues, and we also have a frequently asked question on the difference between plagiarism and copyright infringement, and you will find that at the links that are here on the screen. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigitte. It was a pleasure to hear all the presentation. So we will proceed to the questions. You can type the questions and Leah will read them out. Well, one of the first questions that I have, in one paper that I read, it explained that the extent of plagiarized text in a paper might be considered copyright infringement, and then it pops out into my mind the attribution requirement, because when you attribute other people's work, if you don't do it, it's copyright infringement. So that is a little bit confusing
Yes.
when you discuss plagiarism and copyright infringement with the CC licenses,
Yes.
especially with this requirement.
Well, I think it's important to distinguish the two, because the right of attribution will only apply to works that are in copyright, that are still protected by copyright. Once a work enters the public domain, there is no need to attribute anymore. So the right of attribution does not apply for anything that's in the public domain. However, you can misquote, or you can fail to quote or cite a work that's in the public domain. It won't be copyright infringement because it's not protected by copyright, but it will be plagiarism, because plagiarism applies whether the work is protected by copyright or not. So there might be some situations where it is plagiarism, but it's not copyright infringement, like the one I just described, or when it's both. So it's both plagiarism and copyright infringement. If you fail to attribute, it can be a copyright infringement and plagiarism. And there are some cases where it can be copyright infringement, but not plagiarism. So it can be that, yes, you provide the source, you cite it, but you still reproduce a huge amount, and that's not allowed under copyright law unless you fall under a specific exception. It's not because you provide the source that automatically you're allowed to reproduce large amounts.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So there might be situations that, where you have either plagiarism or copyright infringement, or sometimes both at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think Tom was asking some question here. Let's see. Or you can ask the question, Tom, directly. You can unmute yourself and you can ask the question.
Yeah, I'll ask the question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question would be about copyright and licensing. So I'm working for the DOJ, and you know that, but we see lots of cases where copyright is transferred to the publisher,
Mm-hmm.
as in the old days, and also for the open access cases. And then people may think that if they then use a CC BY license, the authors, that it has to be that the author retains the copyright. And what we see is that you can transfer the copyright to the publisher, then the publisher has the copyright, and the publisher can then say, I use a CC BY. But then the situation is the author doesn't have the copyright, of course, he transferred it, and the work is open access CC BY. So there is a misunderstanding among the authors often that they think it's enough to be CC BY, then I automatically have to retain the copyright. Can you tell us something about that? Mm-hmm. Because perhaps they pick it from your website, that it's not clear enough for them.
I see. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So what I described as being a good safeguard against plagiarism is, of course, when the license is given out by the author. So the right of attribution, yeah, normally is always belongs to the author, but I will not get into these questions because it will vary widely across jurisdictions. But it's true what you say, that if the author of the copyright is the publisher, then the author is not associated with the license at all. It's a license between the publisher and the public will have to attribute the copyright holder of the work, the licensor, the one who gives out the license, and therefore the obligation is to attribute the publisher. So I can see there that it might be a limitation. So there has to be a way to clearly indicate that whenever that happens, it is the name of the author that needs to be provided and not the publisher or both. But this is one of the reasons why we say that we support actually rights retention by authors, that it's much more in the interest of authors to retain their rights than to transfer them to the publishers, because that way they can choose the license that they want, and they will be the ones who will be attributed when their work is used.
Yes, thanks.
Well, I have another question. What will you say concerning the path that universities or countries should take concerning plagiarism? Because in some countries, for instance, in Mexico, it's already prosecuted by the law. However, I don't know what they are currently doing concerning copyright infringement. So, what will be your recommendation concerning the legal path that countries should take concerning plagiarism, such as the case of Mexico? I don't know if they took the correct path concerning punishing plagiarism as a legal offense. So I don't know if this is the correct path or not. So you should tell us more about this. What universities and countries should do?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I don't think that there's a simple answer. I would say that in the majority of cases, plagiarism is treated outside of copyright. I'm not an expert in Mexican law, but I can imagine that there were some reasons for it to be included in the copyright law and to have criminal sanctions attached to it too. And then the responsibility of the research institution to protect their researchers is really to have a very solid code of conduct or ethical framework that is enforced, so that whenever there is a complaint of plagiarism, that the institution takes it seriously, investigates it, and takes the measures that are needed to make the plagiarism stop and to compensate the author for any damage to their reputation, or to take appropriate measures. I'm not an expert in that area. My expertise is really limited to copyright, but I would say that it's very important to have a policy in place that will identify what are the cases of plagiarism, have it communicated clearly to the staff, faculty, and the students, so that everyone knows what's allowed, what's not allowed, and that when there is a case, that there's a process to handle it, and that that process is also clearly communicated. And I think that's probably the extent of the advice that I could give at this point.
Okay, thank you, Brigitte. So I guess there are some more questions. There are more questions from the audience. You can type the questions and Leah can read them out. Well, I don't know. Leah, do you have any questions to Brigitte? No? Okay, maybe there are no more questions, so just...
I would have another.
Yes, Tom.
I would have one other question.
Okay.
So plagiarism can be checked by software programs, but those are usually in English. So Identicate and all these kind of programs check. But are there also programs for Spanish, for other languages, Chinese, etc., that you know of, for publishers to be used? Because that is a real problem if you have to do everything by hand or believe the authors or be alerted to something by the public or so.
Yeah, not that I know of. I wouldn't know.
No, that was my my knowledge as well. I didn't know.
Okay, so this is the comment from Tom. So if there are no more questions, so I guess we can take a break and wait until Tom is prepared for the next presentation. I think it's very important for universities, scholars, professors to acknowledge these differences. They're very important, what copyright licenses can do and cannot do, so it's quite important to know it. And we appreciate the work that Creative Commons is doing across the world. It's very important for universities, especially for thesis repositories, to adopt these licenses, especially the Creative Commons licenses, and implement them, because we were quite worried that many repositories in the presentation last month not even have any kind of licenses, which is kind of worrying. So we always invite scholars and students to acknowledge these important things that their work must have, and to at least claim that they need that the university needs to get these licenses in their works. So thank you very much, Brigitte, and we really appreciate your presentation, and we will be happy to have you again next year. And we wish you all the best, and we will take a short break right now, so we will have 10 minutes break, and thank you. Welcome back to the International Conference of Academic Integrity and Plagiarism. It's a pleasure to have you all again after this short break. I hope that you have enjoyed a coffee. We have prepared a video presenting Tom with our colleague Marlene Zvela. So she's going to present Tom. So let's hear what Marlene is going to say about Tom.
Welcome back, colleagues. Good afternoon. OpenCiencia is aware of the issues that researchers must face to get published in the current publishing system. Pyron and others in 2021 indicated that the publishing system, based on the knowledge economy, maintains the quasi-monopoly of publishers that benefits more themselves rather than the researcher and society. Hence, we have invited an expert on this topic, Tom Olucek from DOAG, and he is our second presenter in this conference. Tom has a PhD in molecular microbiology from the University of Amsterdam and postdoc in Max Planck Institute of Genetics in Berlin. He spent several years in Africa doing research on malaria, sleeping sickness. He has been actively advocating for open access and open sciences since 2012, when he joined the Open Knowledge Community and became a member of the DOAG Advisory Board. He is currently editor-in-chief at DOAG and a member of the Force 11 community. His current research interests are development of quality systems for the assessment of scholarly journals and articles, and research in the area of soil microbiology in relation to soil health and human health. Tom is currently located in Almere in the province of Helgoland in the Netherlands. He is today with us presenting the topic called How the Publish or Perish Culture Compromises Academic Integrity. Please welcome Tom.
Thank you, Marlene. Welcome, Tom. It's a pleasure to have you back again in these important conferences. I'm sorry, your last name is Olihuk, Tom Olihuk. So I apologize, Marlene doesn't know how to pronounce that.
You can pronounce it in various ways. Olihuk, whatever. In the French, they say Olihuk.
Okay, that's nice. So there you go. So welcome.
Thank you. So yes, my presentation. Thank you for the invitation. It was very good to hear a few new things as well about Creative Commons for me, especially about what is included in the copyright and not. And I will talk a bit more about it's academic integrity, which also has to do with plagiarism, of course. The title of my talk, How the Publish and Perish Culture Has Compromised Academic Integrity, is taken from a conversation that I had with John Tennant. Some people may be familiar with the name. And he said, always talking about publish or perish. So you have to publish a lot, and then you can make your career. But in fact, it is a publish and perish culture, because there are so many people trying to get an academic career, and almost nobody can succeed in it because of the rules and the publishing system. So let me just start. The scholarly publishing system, which is at the root of the problem. There are very big global differences. Another co-worker of mine, Florence Piron, who wrote the post-colonial open access chapter in Open Divide, Critical Studies in Open Access. She sadly has died last year, but she had a very big impact on the whole issue of ethical questions in open access. She says there are three parts of the world concerning publishing: the center of global publishing, the semi-periphery, and the periphery of global publishing. So the center is more the US, Europe, Australia. There are the big publishers, and there are also scientists who master English very well and who publish in those journals that are published in US, Europe, Australia. Then you have the semi-periphery, which is China, Brazil, South Africa, Japan. The point is that these people also master English quite well, but they feel the need to publish in the journals published in the center, so in the US, in Europe, and not in their own countries, and certainly not in their own languages. And that is semi-periphery of publishing then. And then you have the real periphery, which is Africa, India, Asia, Latin America. If you look at the chart, we have a chart, I don't show it yet, but there are so few publishers in Africa and not just publishers, also open access publishers. There are not so many compared to Europe and the US. And all those people are just trying to go and publish in journals that are published in the West. It's a sort of a neocolonial agenda, which is often called, for example, by Cameron Neylon. So there's the root of the problem. Everybody thinks they have to publish in English language journals published in the West, which are supposedly of good quality. So, but what in fact do we have? The only thing that, or most things that are published are concerning the Western knowledge system. But we have another world with many knowledges. We have lots of indigenous knowledges. We also have scientific systems that are different from the Western system. We have Chinese philosophies and science. We have even in Australia, in Latin America, we have other systems of thought. And those systems are not very well shared, not even in open access. And I come to that later. This is a very interesting book to open the eyes for all the knowledges in the world. You see that people are really focusing on the academic knowledge from the West, because you see that where the knowledge is coming from and where it's published is in this chart. Apparently, you can see Brazil is okay, but for the rest it's US, it's Europe. Africa is almost non-existent, and even China in this chart is still very, very low. Although China is going to publish more the later times. This is an old graph, but as far as I know, there is not many new ones, and the tendency is still the same. So the current system is a system based on inequitably dispersed knowledge. It's based on selection, and selection is done by ranking of journals and ranking of scientists. There is a lot of competition, and the global south are at a disadvantage just by reputation, by believing they have to publish in those journals in the West, and also by having other languages and being able to express themselves much better, like everyone, in their own language. So the system is also called, the publishing system and the whole science system is based on something called the knowledge economy. And the knowledge economy is something special. It has as features protection, competition, selection, exclusiveness. And in fact, everything is about making money from knowledge, having economic profits from knowledge. And for that, you need to just protect your properties. And you do competition to get the best of the best. Selection, the same thing. And exclusiveness means that you make something rare, and that means that it can be expensive. That is a principle of economy. So the cornerstones of the current system of the knowledge economy, just governing the whole publication process and also science, is restricted access, because then you can make it more expensive, competitive science, exclusive English language, which exclude other languages, and there is company-controlled infrastructure, so that the publishing business has also control over the infrastructure, and the research is relevant for making profits. So there is not a real eye for what is relevant for certain populations, let's say social aspects, what is relevant for the planet if you go to a higher level. No, it's about a lot about profits. So it has resulted in a very few publishers, big publishers with many journals, publishing mainly Western knowledge. Assessing is done by a metric system. How many citations are there? And of course, if everybody wants to publish in a journal from the West, most citations will be in those journals. And if you think you have to publish in a journal that has most citations, average, then it just is a closed loop. And in fact, what is happening is that this kind of metrics by citation analysis in the hands of some publishers, but also companies in the West, is serving as a marketing tool for the publishers to have people publish in their journals. The quality of science is often said, well, it depends on peer review, and peer review is the holy grail. And in fact, it isn't. Peer review is also very biased. Peer review is done by very few people, if you look at the global level. And it often is a closed system of people who know each other, so that even some articles are just refused because the professors or the people in that review board don't believe in those data, or they just don't want to believe it, and they are not open to other things. So it is a biased system, the peer review system. There are better systems that you can think of. People are working on it. There is also the aspect of protection of knowledge as a property, which is reflected in copyright for the publisher, all rights reserved. You may say open access is better, but open access can also be used by the publishers to make a lot of money again and protect their property. There is exclusiveness and competition. Another important aspect of our knowledge economy is that the research is aimed at controlling nature and controlling natural processes. You want to make the soil better, to have more crops, and that's why you are going to control it by having artificial stuff put in the soil that the soil doesn't need. There are better systems that are more working with nature, and it is really working controlling nature. Controlling people is another thing. Social sciences, fighting against the environment instead of looking how we fit in. Fighting against disease. People always say we have to fight the virus. People even talk about COVID as something that you can fight, some adversary. Conquering new territories and wanting to have a property in it, and increasing all that you have already. That is, the research is very biased towards this kind of principles. So the sum is that the whole system is kept together by ranking, and the ranking under the control of big publishers and for-profit companies in the West is leading to a lot of inequality and exclusivity. And exclusivity in turn means that there is a lot of money that can be asked for exclusive products because everything is seen as a product. Everything is linked to production and distribution of knowledge in the knowledge economy for profit, and not with something else in mind, not very much at least. And the result for the scientists is that there is a rat race, and there is a publish and perish. Why is there a publish and perish? Well, because the publication pressure, you want to publish, you need to publish for your career, is leading to unreliable research data. Everybody wants to publish as fast as possible. It means that the research data are less trustworthy than when you took more time. There is also more plagiarized content because of the enormous amount of publications. It is very difficult to keep track on what has been published or done already. And it means also that there is lots of duplicate results. I mean, efforts that are done in research that cost money and that have already been done. There is also an over-reliance on peer review. I explained that a few minutes ago. importantly, there is a false sense of excellence. I mean, people in the West, the Western scientists, feel a lot about our science is the best and our view of the world is the best, and everybody has to adapt. And sadly enough, the people who are not in the northern hemisphere or in the Western countries also believe that that is true, that there is an excellence in the science in the West. And there is a kind of a neo-colonial agenda because of the science that is believed is the science that is originating there and the publications that come from the West. In this sense, it's also a marginalization of non-Western knowledge. It's very difficult to find anything, for example, on COVID research doesn't have molecular biology or pharmaceutical principles as a topic. And there are other ways to deal with these kinds of issues of disease, not by combating disease, but also by preventing, more prevention than combating disease. So the publish and perish, like I said, I want to repeat it again, is because there is so many people trying to do exactly the same thing and publish in very few excellent journals that 99%, 90% of the academic people who perhaps want to make a career just stay on track and are never going to make a career. This competition is very unhealthy. So now we come to the knowledge democracy. This is something quite different, which has something to do with open access. Features are sharing, collaboration, and diversity and inclusiveness. You want to share results, you want to collaborate with people, know about what other people do freely. There is diversity in ideas and in topics that are being researched. And there is inclusiveness in also what people are publishing, who is publishing, and the topics that are being published on. It's very important, I think. The cornerstones of the knowledge democracy is the open access and open science pathways, which should be, but often are not. And in our times, you see there is other tendencies. Community-controlled infrastructures, publishing in local languages, and doing research relevant to society. Those are cornerstones to build a knowledge democracy. The topics that are being researched in this kind of philosophy is working with nature instead of against nature, in controlling it, but just trying to adapt, helping people and protecting the environment, focusing on prevention-based medicine and not necessarily all the time developing new medicines against some diseases to fight bugs, but provide means for people to deal with diseases without a lot of pharmaceutical interventions. Respecting new territories instead of wanting to be the owners of it, and sharing the wealth of the earth in the broader sense, and not being there with an eye on what can I gain on it, how much can I earn on it, and how wealthy can we become individually. And I think this is also an article by Florence Piron, that this other kind of science is possible. There is another kind of science that focuses on people and what people need and what people do, that focuses on the aspects of prevention in medicine, that focuses on preserving the earth, not putting lots of artificial dungers in the earth and see that the earth is going to give a lot more crops, and then after some time everything's done because the soil is dead and you can never get anything out of it anymore. So preserving the earth, preserving the knowledge of the indigenous people who very well know how to deal with their environment, instead of trying to control the environment by all kinds of technical ways. And I think this is an interesting article if you are interested in it. Of course, you can find a translation in English. It's published in French. So let's go to some examples. There is a book, Scholarly Communication and Knowledge Democracy by the UN, and it's saying no to rankings metrics, where I participated in writing this article. This is the knowledge-based economy that dominates the world of scientific publication at the moment can be transformed by instilling values of the knowledge democracy, especially in the practices of researchers. I have been talking about the broad systems, the publishers, the researchers as such, but the minds of the researchers have to also change. They have to believe in open, and they have to believe that if they share their results, that it's not losing things, that it's not giving away things for free, but that they can profit in an intellectual way from sharing their results. It's not about protecting your property, which is yours, and then letting nobody have any profits of it. So this is the book, International Perspectives on Knowledge Democracy. And it says a lot of things about how at the root of changing the minds of the researchers and the scholars in a broader sense, so also the general public, the people that are interested in science, the citizen scientists, how they can be educated in a social responsible way. And there is very interesting chapters in this book. You can buy the paper version, of course, but it's an open access book. You can find the chapters as PDFs to be downloaded. So it's really good to just share this work as broadly as possible with all the people you know, in order to get any change in the attitude of scientists and the broader public. One thing about publishing is that if the things that are published in open access are published in open access in Western journals, then often it will be English. And there will still be the drive for people, for example, in Uganda or in Senegal or in any African country or Indonesia, to publish as much as possible in those Western journals. And I think it's not the best way to have the maximum profit of the knowledge that is in the world. So there is one initiative in Africa for local language journals. The local language journals will say Hausa, which you may never have heard of. It's just a local language in an African country, or any other language. And the principal point is that if people are allowed to publish in their language, they will be much more able to express what they have found and to just describe it in the way that they want to describe it instead of English. And also, in this case, the governments in those countries should be aware of those publications and give them credit for what they are, because most of those publications in local languages will also be about locally relevant topics and systems and research subjects. So this is one example of a platform with local languages, many different African languages on topics of agriculture, philosophy, sociology, psychology, and medicine, of course. Lots of things. It's just started, but I think this is one of the kinds of open access platforms that we will need to have knowledge of the world dispersed and not just Western knowledge. So these are, for example, a few of those journals that you already have, Nige and Mashamba and Gabon Dibisel. It's yeah, those are really good articles in the local language. And if anyone is interested in these topics, you can find translations as well and see if you can contact the authors, because it's not said that you cannot be known outside of your own language part, that you have to publish in English. The most important thing is that the people that need your knowledge are first aware of it and can understand what you do. And therefore you need a local language. And another important platform, of course, in Latin America, Shallow, where they also publish open access journals. And those open access journals are not under the control of Western publishers, but they are under the control of local publishers, and especially university publishers, library publishers. It's a quite different system from the system that has developed in Europe, US. And it deserves to have a closer look by all people in the West who are in favor of open access and are trying to give the examples of open access that work. So what should this new scholarly communication system look like? It should be global, and it should be open access. And it should have a regional perspective. And that's why I come back to this Latin America example. You can see the reference. Open access in Latin America is scholar-led and publicly funded. This is different from what we know. So you really need to ensure scholar-led collaborative open access rather than alliances with the commercial publishing and indexing services. Why? Because if you fall in the trap, you will see that publishing will become much, much more expensive, because the cost of the publishing will not just depend on the real cost, but will also have some aspect of making profits for shareholders in the company that publishes those articles. Plan S is also an example of open access in another sense than just the big publishers. There is a role for the APCs. I want to make the remark that carries a risk of replicating the scholarly communication system with subscription journals, because imagine that all the open access journals will be published by big publishers. I won't name any names, few ones, just 3, 4, 5 big publishers. And those ones will charge APCs. Then we will not have gained much except open access, which is of course okay if everybody can be shared. But the cost of publishing will be as high or higher, and the system will just continue. The capitalist system, the knowledge economy will carry on. Plan S could work, but we have to keep an eye out for this APC costs and transparency in pricing. And one of the things that we see in the West as well, in Europe, is that a few international publishers are really asked by European instances, European government and officials to lead the way in open science and open access, which to my view is a bit strange and is also very risky. And yeah, I'll just give this as a thought to you. What do you think about it and what can you do about it? So the conclusions. Well, we need a new system with open access outlets published in local languages, localized also in those countries in the world and not just in northern countries. And there has to be an accreditation and respect for those publications, and not thinking that anything published in your own country is less than being published in the US, for example. And there is a very big condition that the journals and the platforms do adhere to the principles of the knowledge democracy, the sharing and working with nature, etc. I'll have a brief mention of the Directive Open Access Journals. I work for the directory, and we have an index of open access journals all over the world. So you see, we have journals indexed from Africa, Latin America, Indonesia, Asia, China, also from North America, Europe, of course. But we aim at having more and more journals in local languages that fulfill the criteria of quality in publishing and science, and are open access in the sense of open access with a license and open access with the conditions of copyright very clear. And that's our mission. That is the mission of the Directive Open Access Journals. I thank all the, we are financed just by sponsors, universities, publishers, libraries, and we are a not-for-profit organization. So we work with over 100 volunteers in all parts of the world to check the journals in the local languages, and with a staff of about 14 people in various areas of expertise. These are the silver sponsors, and I thank you for your listening to this long talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. It was an excellent presentation. I completely agree with you concerning the rat race and the stress that has been imposing this publish and perish culture in scholars. Well, I think the first question that comes to my mind is concerning the funding, because this is one of the most difficult things to change in this transition from the knowledge economy to the knowledge democracy. What should we do concerning the funding, the funders? Because sometimes the problem is with them, because they pressure the scholars to publish in these Western journals with high impact factors. Otherwise, they won't provide the necessary funding to complete the study and blah blah blah. So it's the never-ending issue with the funding. So what would you suggest concerning the strategy to implement, especially with them?
Yeah, I think you have the funders and you have the university councils and the people who make decisions on careers. And what has to change is the attitude of these university councils, that they say you don't need to publish in those exact journals because those journals have a ranking and because those journals are in some list at the highest position. No, you have to publish your research in open access, and then it doesn't matter where you publish. It has to be published in a quality open access journal or platform, not necessarily in those journals that are reputable. And Plan S, for example, already says you have to publish open access, and you have to publish in a journal that is indexed in the Directive Open Access Journal, if you publish in a journal. And you can also publish your articles freely in a repository, for example, and then it doesn't cost anything. And the funders that are behind Plan S have devised this scheme, so they are completely in agreement with it. So the problem is addressed in this way in Western countries. For example, in the Netherlands, there are now 2 universities who say it officially doesn't matter where you publish, but it matters what you publish, and it also matters what other activities you have. Do you have a network of people that you are in contact with as a scientist? How many collaborations do you have? If you do teaching, how well is your teaching received? What do the students think about your teaching? All this is taken in the assessment of the researchers, and not just, oh, they have published in science, they have published in experimental medicine, to name a few. And the strange thing is, or it's not so strange, that the scientists of those universities have protested, quite a few, against these measures, because they believe in the high ranking and the important journals, and their careers connected to it. And this is something that you have to cut. And you rightly say, the funders have a lot of power. So if research is funded by funders who don't look at where you publish, but what you publish, and the other matters, then the things can change. That is what I think should happen. So I really believe in that the setup of the Plan S is a good one, and it could lead to a better world there.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I just want to comment that maybe the APCs were thought concerning the business model of journals, because sometimes they struggle to survive over time, so they don't have the necessary funding, so it's sometimes difficult for them to continue over time. But I don't know, maybe there is a better way, a better business model that the European Council can come up in the future and think about not replicating this knowledge economy with the journals. I don't think that Elsevier could. Well, they were invited. It was actually quite interesting to implement this, and it's a bit strange. I think that the traditional open access journals that have been doing this job for many years are maybe the best candidates to carry out the Plan S and see how it goes. So the only issue that we have in Latin America, yep. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that you're right, but the APCs are not transparent. So if a journal like Nature Communications asks €4,500 for an article, it's out of reach. And why should it? I mean, the article is not worth €4,500. It's the price that is paid for something that is made rare. So if a journal is just rejecting 90% or 99% of all articles, it's very difficult to be published there. And people think if you publish there, you will become a professor. It only takes a bit of time, but sometime soon you will be professor. Then the system will continue, and people pay €4,500. But it has nothing to do with publishing. So there should be much more transparency about the prices. And I think there have been quite a few studies that show that academic articles can be published by a publisher around 600-700, or let's say, 500-600 euros or dollars an article, and have a sustainable company, a company that makes profits, that can pay their employees, and that can stay in business. And it is never necessary to go higher and higher and higher and make more profits all the time.
Yeah, you're completely right concerning that. The only crazy thing that is happening in Mexico is that the National Council of Science and Technology is going actually in the opposite way, asking the researchers who belong to the National Council based on merits to they're pushing them to publish in this top high impact factor journals, and it's they're really struggling to be part of the National Council. So they're like struggling with the money, and so I don't know what exactly they are doing or what exactly are their plans, but I think they're going into the opposite direction. At least in Guatemala, the situation is far better. They're not asking these crazy things. So, and well, it's just.
But I think there is a lot of.
Yeah.
No, I think you're so.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I have an example from Indonesia. Indonesia was very much in favor of open access. And I think there is one important factor that makes those countries and Latin America, like Mexico, go for the big journals and the big names, and that is the big publisher lobby. The big publishers have a lot of money, and they use that money for lobbying. In the EU, in Brussels, they spend enormous amounts of money lobbying for their publishing businesses. And for example, in Indonesia, they use the directive open access journals to give credit to journals. But recently, they have decided to give more points to journals that are in the Web of Science and Elsevier. And they downgraded being in the directive open access journals to a level of, if you have the directive open access journals or you are indexed in the Google Scholar, then you get 1 point. And if you are in the Web of Science, then you get 3 points or something for your article, which is completely, and I can prove that, it's completely forced by the big publishers going to Indonesia, lobbying for their companies and being very successful because they have large amounts of money to work with.
Yeah,
that is how it works at the moment.
Yeah, it's a sad story, but well, we hope that we can change that with making more campaigns, more pressure, and DOJ is doing an excellent job concerning this transition, and I think it's the best approach for universities, scholars, and students who want to become researchers in the future. And as you said, it's a very difficult thing to become a researcher if you are meant to maintain this kind of crazy publishing thing with this knowledge economy and competing and doing more harm than good. And I think the best is to change the paradigm of doing research and actually benefit society more than control it. So, well, it's always useful to learn new things, and it's very useful that DOAJ is also pushing to this transition. So we hope that in Latin America we will follow the same path, and we will push as well here, and we hope that in Mexico it will change in the near future. So let's see the questions. I don't know if there are some questions from the audience. Do you have any questions? You can unmute yourselves and you can ask questions to Tom. anyone wants to ask some questions? Well, you can ask anything to Tom. He's representing the OIJ today, so you have the opportunity to. Well, we appreciate the effort that the OIJ is doing in Latin America. You have some ambassadors here that are doing a really great job. Okay, from Vinicius, I just want to thank Tom for the talk. Okay. Anyone else wants to?
No, thank you.
Okay, it was really great. What else? Any other question? Leah, do you have any questions? Well, it's a pleasure to always have the OIJ and Creative Commons in these conferences. Just let me point out that the OIJ is having some. They have some ambassadors who also have some seminars. They provide some seminars, and I think Yvonne is doing her PhD in Texas, so I don't know, someone else is taking her place right now. But well, we had Clara last time, so it was great. I hope that we will have Clara next year, and Tom as well. So thank you, Tom. I really appreciate your presentation, and keep working so well as the OIJ is working with journals, open access, and all the rest of the things that you do. So thank you very much. We will have a short break right now, and we will come back in 12 minutes at well, it's 3 p.m. in Europe, and will be 8 p.m. here in Guatemala, and 9 p.m. in Mexico. So thank you, and let's have a short break for a coffee, and we will see you shortly. Welcome back to the International Conference of Academic Integrity and Plagiarism. It's a pleasure to have you back again. I will be presenting in the next hour. I would like to thank you, Marlene, who is going to introduce me to you. So let's watch what she's going to say.
Welcome back, colleagues. Good afternoon. OpenCiencia agrees with Kovico and Moitaba in 2009 that academic integrity in higher education is more than being the police of academic misconduct. It's important to create an academic context in which academic integrity is known and practiced. However, that doesn't mean that sanctions to academic integrity violations must be overlooked. It is not known the extent of how universities are making public the do's and the don'ts in academic integrity and the investment on academic integrity practices. Therefore, we have invited an expert on this topic, Humberto Aguilera from OpenCiencia, and he is our third presenter at this conference. During his stay in Mexico for 5 years, Humberto studied a bachelor's and a master's degree in psychology from Ibero-American University of Puebla. He also conducted advanced studies in the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Afterwards, he got a scholarship to study in Czech Republic. He holds a PhD in social psychology from Masaryk University. Humberto lived in the Czech Republic for 16 years. He was an instructor and researcher at the University of New York in Prague and Charles University. Actually, he was my instructor and mentor at the University of New York in Prague. He has been an academic mentor of bachelor's, master's, and PhD students among different European and Latin American universities. Likewise, he was the editor-in-chief of Revista Internacional de Psicología, translated as International Journal of Psychology, for 20 years. He gained experience in the editorial work and evaluation of research projects. Humberto has also worked as a consultant from NGOs in different countries, such as the Research Center of Human Development and Society in Guatemala. Likewise, he was a clinical monitor associate at Syneos Health, working on the development of new drugs. In 2019, Humberto founded the academic organization called OpenCiencia, a sponsoring organization from Crossref. The organization has been providing solutions to issues that editorial teams, universities, researchers, and students are currently facing in their work. Currently, OpenCiencia is working in 6 countries, working together with editorial teams, universities, and researchers. Humberto is currently located in Guatemala, although he often travels to El Salvador, Mexico, and the Czech Republic. He is today with us presenting on the topic called Academic Integrity in Mexican and Guatemalan Universities. Please welcome Humberto.
Thank you, Marlene. It was a pleasure to hear you introducing me. Since I will be presenting, I pre-recorded my presentation, and since it's not possible to do everything with this software, so I apologize for not doing in real time. However, I will answer your questions after the recording is over. Good morning, colleagues. I'm going to present a topic about academic integrity in Mexican and Guatemalan universities. The first thing that we are going to see is academic integrity. Academic integrity is central to every academic institution. In every course taken at a higher education institution, professors warn students of the sanctions when violating academic integrity. However, Cavico and Muitava in 2009 noted that academic integrity doesn't play the role of the policeman of academic violations. Cavico and Muitava in 2009 suggested that academic integrity is a culture that should be strengthened and practiced. Nonetheless, the concept of academic integrity has been popularly framed negatively. For instance, Bourne and colleagues in 2002 and Gao and colleagues in 2008 mentioned that academic integrity relates to unethical behavior in teaching. Departing from this perspective, authors such as McFarlane and colleagues in 2014 define academic integrity as values, behavior, and conduct of academics in all aspects of their practice, such as in teaching, research, and service. However, in the Latin American context, it's not known whether the policy of these values, behavior, and conduct is made public by universities. Then we have the research question, the first research question: do Mexican and Guatemalan universities have a public academic integrity policy? Interestingly enough, Garcia Villegas pointed out that in Latin America, violations to academic integrity are taken more seriously since perceived public sector corruption has increased. Therefore, it's possible to talk about academic misconduct. Academic integrity violations are known as academic misconduct. McFarlane and colleagues in 2014 explained that academic misconduct involves fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, and other abusive practices that are unethical, carried out by researchers and students. McFarlane and colleagues in 2014 added that academic integrity seems to perceive lack of academic integrity. seems to be the perceived lack of academic integrity. Nonetheless, in Latin American context, it's not known whether the policy of academic misconduct is made public by universities. Thence, we have our second research question. Do Mexican and Guatemalan universities have a public academic misconduct policy? Then we are going to talk about plagiarism detection tools. During the last decades, electronic tools have been created to combat academic misconduct, especially plagiarism. Hence, universities that can afford the service to check similarities in the students' and faculty members' work have implemented this plagiarism detection tools. Nonetheless, the plagiarism detection tools are not cheap. The service can cost thousands of dollars for universities, and not all of them can afford it. Therefore, we have our third research question. Do Mexican and Guatemalan universities have a plagiarism detection tool? And we are going to talk about similarity indices that are related to this, the product of this plagiarism detection tools. Plagiarism detection tools usually provide a composite index of similarities found in the work from primary sources published in digital repositories, journals, and so on. An example is Turnitin's Similarity Check Index. Although Turnitin's Similarity Check Index is not a direct measure of plagiarism, it is a useful tool to detect the extent of coincidences in the work that might fall into plagiarism. Therefore, Turnitin recommends having a similarity index equal or below 25%. Then we have our fourth research question. What is the similarity check index in manuscripts of theses in university repositories? We have as well the report of similarity indices. So as universities become more transparent, publishing research outcomes, theses in university repositories are published, disclosing the similarity index obtained in the plagiarism detection tools. Therefore, we have our fifth research question. Do Mexican and Guatemalan universities report similarity indices in theses? Now we are going to talk about our last topic, which is academic integrity practices. Well, it is not sufficient that universities exclusively focus on using plagiarism detection tools. This is quite well known if we are aimed to combat academic misconduct. It is important to have academic integrity practices at the university setting. Therefore, we have our last research question. Do Mexican and Guatemalan universities invest on academic integrity practices? So let's talk about the aims of this study. The aims of this study were to go beyond academic integrity violations. This is one of our first goals, and explore whether Mexican and Guatemalan universities have academic integrity practices. Furthermore, the study intended to assess whether universities make public academic integrity and misconduct policies. In addition, the study evaluated whether universities have plagiarism detection tools and report similarity indices in theses as an effort of transparency. Lastly, the study aimed to evaluate the extent of similarities found in the work from published sources. Now we have the operational definitions of main variables. Well, the first variable that we have is academic integrity policy. Academic integrity policy was defined in this study in terms of having principles of action concerning academic integrity adopted by universities. The second main variable was academic misconduct policy, and it was operationalized in terms of having principles of action concerning academic integrity sanctions adopted by university members. The next main variable was plagiarism detection tool, and it was defined in terms of having a software to detect coincidences from other works in manuscripts. Our next main variable was Turnitin Similarity Check Index, and it was personalized in terms of the percentage of similarities found in Turnitin's database from primary sources in manuscripts. Then we have the similarity index, and it was defined in terms of the percentage of similarities found in the respective software's database from primary sources in manuscripts. And our last main variable was academic integrity practices, and it was personalized in terms of the number of compulsory courses about academic writing, research methods, and data analysis needed to promote academic integrity during the study program. Now, we are going to talk about the method employed in this study. Well, this research study employed a quantitative descriptive study to empirically assess the research questions. It was selected this research design due to its simplicity and issues obtaining a representative sample. Although the repositories have open access to their content, it is not possible to obtain a list of theses in the repositories unless it is requested to universities. Although it was initially requested to Mexican repositories, they didn't respond at all to a request. Now we have the units of analysis. The units of analysis were a bachelor, master, and PhD thesis, study programs, and universities from Mexico and Guatemala. The inclusion criteria were the following: open access to the thesis in the university thesis repository, and detailed study programs in the university websites. The study population consisted of 58 universities with the thesis repositories, 49 from Mexico and 9 from Guatemala. I gather a convenience sample composed by 35 universities from Mexico and Guatemala. In addition, I sampled 37 random theses from the university repositories. In addition, it was sampled 37 study programs of the selected thesis from each university. So let's see the type of institution. As regards the type of institution, there were 71.33% of them that were public universities compared to 28.57% that were private universities. Concerning the country of these universities, the majority, 82.86% of the sample, were Mexican universities, whereas 17.14% were Guatemalan. Concerning the academic degree to complete, the majority, 62.16% of the sample, were master thesis, followed by 35.14% of bachelor's ones. A minority, 2.7%, were PhD theses. And the last was the academic field. As regards the academic field that these theses belong to, The majority, 62.16% of the sample, were from social sciences. In contrast, 16.22% of the theses were from engineering sciences. A minority, 10.81%, were theses conducted in health and medical sciences. Let's talk about the procedure and analysis. As regards the procedure of the study, the first step was to gather a convenient sample of universities with open access to the thesis in their respective repositories. Afterwards, it was checked whether universities provided in their websites the academic integrity and misconduct policies. In addition, it was explored whether universities reported a plagiarism detection tool that they recommended faculty members and students to use. Furthermore, it was obtained a random sample of theses from various disciplines and academic degrees. The random sample of theses were processed in Turnitin and obtained the similarity check index. The similarity check report excluded quotes and references. Lastly, the number of compulsory courses in academic writing, research methods, and data analysis were calculated from the study programs of the selected thesis of the repositories. It was computed the overall and by academic degree courses to have a better picture of the extent of investment on academic integrity practices. So now let's check the results of this study. So concerning the results, the first one is basically public academic integrity policy. Concerning the public academic integrity policy, it was found that the majority of universities, 97.14% of the sample, had in fact this type of policy. Now, concerning the policy of the public academic misconduct policy, it was discovered that 82.86% of universities had this type of policy. As regards the plagiarism detection tool, in fact, 94.29% of universities reported to faculty members and students a tool to detect plagiarism that they can use. Interestingly enough, Mexican universities, 82.86% of the sample, had access to this tool since the National Council of Science and Technology is providing this service to these universities. With respect to Turnitin Similarity Check Index, we are going to see first the overall results. So it was calculated the overall and by academic degree index, Turnitin Similarity Check Index, on the random sample of theses from the repositories. Concerning the overall Turnitin Similarity Check Mean Index, it was found that it was 18.7. However, it ranged from 3 to 58, with a standard deviation of 12.42. As regards the Turnitin Similarity Check Mean Index by academic degree, it was found that the mean index was 27 in bachelor thesis. And then we have the similarity check index on master studies. So in master studies, it was found that the mean index was 13.88%, lower than the one reported in bachelor thesis. And now we're going to check the report of similarity indices in thesis. So concerning the report of similarity indices in thesis from repositories, it was noted that this practice was not popular at all. Only 97.14% of the theses in the random sample did not have reported the similarity index. And lastly, we are going to talk about the investment on academic integrity practices. So first, it was computed the overall, and then the academic investment on academic integrity practices by academic degree. And concerning the overall academic integrity practices, it was calculated the overall number of courses on academic writing, research methods, and data analysis in the study programs of the selected thesis. So we're going to check first the overall academic writing courses. So firstly, the overall mean of academic writing courses was quite low. It was 0.26. The minimum was 0, and the maximum was 2. So this is actually the next slide. The overall mean of academic writing courses, in this case, was low. So the minimum was 0, and the maximum was 2, with a standard deviation of 0.56. And then we are going to check the overall mean in research method courses. So the overall mean in research methods courses was low as well, 1.41, and it ranged from 0 to 4 with a standard deviation of 0.99. And then we have the overall data analysis courses. So thirdly, the overall mean of data analysis courses was also low, 1.06, and it varied from 0 to 3 with a standard deviation of 0.9. In short, the investment on academic integrity practices is low and not sufficient. Now we are going to check the investment on academic integrity practices by academic degree. So concerning the academic integrity practices by academic degree, it was calculated the number of courses on academic writing, research methods, and data analysis in bachelor and master study programs of the selected thesis. So in the bachelor's study programs, we have first the academic writing courses. So firstly, the mean of academic writing courses in bachelor's study programs was quite low, 0.38. The minimum was 0 and the maximum was 2, with a standard deviation of 0.65. Secondly, the overall mean of research methods courses in bachelor studies was also low, 1.38, and it ranged from 0 to 3 with a standard deviation of 1.04. And then we have the data analysis courses in bachelor's study program. So it was found that the mean of data analysis courses in bachelor study programs was also quite low, 1.5. It varied from 0 to 3 with a standard deviation of 0.78. And then we have the master study program. So the academic writing courses in master study program. So the mean of academic writing courses in master study programs was very low, almost 0, 0.10. The minimum in this case was 0 and the maximum was 1 with a standard deviation of 0.3. In research methods, the overall mean of research method courses was low, in this case was 1.5, and it ranged from 0 to 4 with a standard deviation of 0.95. Yeah, 1.5 was the mean in this case, for the research method courses. And lastly, in data analysis courses, the mean of data analysis courses was quite low as well, 0.81, and it varied from 0 to 3 with a standard deviation of 0.87. In short, the investment on academic integrity practices in bachelor and master study programs is low and not sufficient. So let's talk about, let's discuss the results. And let's see what we found out. It was actually quite positive that universities are making public their policy about academic integrity and misconduct. This is consistent with Garcia Villegas in 2016, mentioned about the seriousness of violations to academic integrity. In addition, it was positive that plagiarism detection tools are facilitated by institutions such as the National Council of Science and Technology in Mexico. Since the plagiarism detection tools are expensive, this scenario in Guatemala is changing right now. More and more faculties are implementing them. However, the adoption is small compared to the one in Mexico. It is important to note that there are more universities in Mexico, many more universities in Mexico, and the National Council in Science and Technology is only providing a few of them. It's not a big percentage of universities who are benefited by this by the service that they are providing to these universities. Also, it wasn't a surprise that the similarity check indices were within the acceptable range. However, it was noticeable that the index was higher in bachelor's thesis than the one in master studies. Although similarity indices reported in thesis are not compulsory, they are becoming more and more popular to publish along with the studies. However, this practice was not popular at all among studies published in university repositories. So we hope that universities publish more and more the similarity indices for the university to become more transparent in these processes. Based on the results as well, it is a big concern that investment on academic integrity practices is low and insufficient. This is quite clear because students need more courses and practice to write academic papers. In addition, research methods and data analysis courses provide the bedrock to conduct studies. Therefore, the number of courses should increase, especially to avoid academic ghostwriting, which is an undesirable practice. It's really undesirable because students are quite desperate. They don't know what to do. They don't know even how to create a research question, to use a research design. So they get quite desperate, and they desperately need for advice. Therefore, it's quite common to find these students hiring these companies and or even academics to do the ghostwriting. And also, it's important to avoid, in this case, other type of academic misconduct. Therefore, it's very important that these courses, if universities are really interested on invest on academic integrity practices, they should invest more time to spend with students to teach them how to write academic papers, how to use the academic style selected by the faculty or by the university, in order to understand how to prepare these papers. And also, it's very important that these research methods courses and bachelor's and master studies are sufficient in order to for the students to know how to conduct the projects, the research projects in advance, for sure. So in that way, together with the data analysis courses, they get prepared more and more to write the thesis that is expected from them. So that's why it's very important to invest on academic integrity practices, spending more courses that the students should take, must take, actually, in order to prepare them for the study and to publish decent research study in the thesis. So thank you all, and I wish you the best, and I'm open for questions right now. So thank you very much. Okay, so thank you for paying attention to the presentation. I think that there are some things that are important to clarify. The first thing that it's important to clarify is that universities, especially the National Council of Science and Technology in Mexico, what I was exploring actually was whether universities have in fact this plagiarism detection tool. However, it's not only that they just mention that they have that they provide some or that there are some plagiarism detection tools. In fact, it's I was exploring whether they whether they actually have a plagiarism detection tool. So in that way, they can provide to scholars, to students, and researchers a way to scan to detect some similarities, and we understand that is not the best way to detect plagiarism. I mean, it's not a direct measure of plagiarism, but it's an important way to just see whether you might have some issues concerning plagiarism. You might fall some parts of the text into plagiarism, so it's something that you have to check and see whether you need to correct the writing, include some quotations that you forgot. So the thing concerning the National Council of Science and Technology in Mexico is that they are subsidizing, they're paying some money instead of the university, so they're in some way reducing the cost for Mexican universities. However, they have some kind of selection criteria that it's not quite clear. I don't exactly understand how it works, but they have some kind of top rank study programs from some certain universities, from which they actually provide this subsidizing service of the plagiarism detection tool, because we understand it's very expensive. Turnitin was it was among the most popular one, so that's the reason why we were looking directly for this specific tool in universities, and well, actually, in fact, most of them use it, so it's quite predictable that they were going to mention it in some part of the website. And well, the thing, checking the papers, the thesis from the repositories, is basically to see whether they did actually use the software in order to fix the issues concerning similarities and maybe plagiarism. So that's the reason why we did this. We used this approach. I think the best way to understand this study is to see that it's not about academic violations, academic integrity is not just about focusing on violations, it's also creating this culture. It's very important to have this kind of culture and these practices, because the practices are, they're actually provide a better path, they enhance the values that they promote, that the university is promoting in students and scholars. So time to time they say, well, if the professor is allowing cheating, or plagiarism, so students are expected to that it's okay, it's admissible, but that's the reason why it's they have changed quite a bit in Mexico the approach to sanction, to punish plagiarism. So it's, as you know, something against the law right now, and it's something that is very popular among universities. The other issue with this study, I think that it's important to mention, is that it's a very small sample. We understand that it's not representing all universities in Mexico. This is a very important thing to clarify. The issue also is to gather really a representative sample, because it's very difficult for researchers to have access to all the database that the National Repository of Thesis in Mexico have. It's actually growing, the repository, but it's very difficult to communicate with them. So it's we requested the access to have this database, but they didn't reply at all. So we decided to conduct the study in this way, and we invite the researchers and scholars to replicate and continue and extend this study. I think it's very important to replicate and reproduce as well this study. We are very happy to provide the database and the study when will be published in preprint with all the information that it's necessary to continue this study. And I think it will be very useful to see the outcome, the outlook of this issue in these countries. I think it's not so bad concerning the policies and the popularity of these tools. However, I think it's better for universities to enhance the practices. You might wonder, well, how you determine the range, the low range or high range of courses needed in order to understand whether it's not sufficient the number of academic writing courses or research methods. Or, well, I think it's very important to mention that bachelor studies they usually have more time, so which in most cases you have a higher number of courses in the study program, which is reasonable. You study, well, in some cases in these countries we have the old Spanish system with 5 years. It's like something between the bachelor's and master's degree, but in fact, well, you have more time, so therefore you have more courses. However, we think that in some cases they don't have exclusive courses for these areas, and it was actually the way how we operationalize it, because sometimes they decide to put some research methods, theory or practice in other subjects, which is sometimes unreasonable, because students need time to learn how to conduct the study, how to interpret the data, how to report it. If they don't learn this slowly practicing, it's very hard for them to write something meaningful, and it will impact as well the way how they write papers in the future. So and sometimes they get desperate, and sometimes they get very frustrated in the academia because they don't know how to do it. So I think universities must focus on this, focus on the academic integrity practices. Maybe it should be operationalized in other ways, maybe in terms of hours, I don't know, or in terms of practical tasks that you have to do in the number of practical tasks that you have to do in the subjects. But I don't know, I think it's something that universities lack, and I think it's very important to enhance this thing that is, in my opinion, quite low. I had experience teaching, so I quite know quite well these issues. So I think that the presentation is quite clear, and I hope that you have some questions to ask. Let's see. Well, Nicolas he mentioned not all universities in Mexico are using plagiarism to detect programs. That is correct, and that is the issue that we mentioned. Is we don't know actually. That's a very good research question. How many universities, in fact, in Mexico are using, in fact, some plagiarism detection tool? Maybe they are using some free versions or some paid versions. I don't know. Or they share some paid versions. That's something that it's very difficult to determine unless you ask scholars or universities whether they provide this tool. So I understand that sometimes it's not the job of the National Council of Science and Technology to provide this, but I think that it's maybe a good strategy if they can reduce the prices and they can make it affordable for universities to have it available, and have it available for students as well and scholars, so they can take care of this issue. So it would be a very important thing to do if you would like to extend the study and cover more universities. The situation, for instance, in Guatemala is that, well, it's actually growing. More and more universities are implementing Turnitin, especially Turnitin, because it has been one of the most popular ones. So, well, at least the state, the National University in Guatemala is implementing it. Not all faculties, but it's still growing, so it's something good. And I think that in Guatemala maybe it could be a big opportunity. We don't have so many universities. We have, I think, 11. And 10 are private, and one is the only national university that we have. So I think that it's good that it's growing here, because they didn't have it at all. So only private universities such as, for instance, University Francisco Marroquín. This is probably the one who. Because it's very expensive, and students pay a lot, and they were able to hire the Turnitin, to get Turnitin and provide it to scholars and students. So Tom is asking here a question: what do you think publishers who provide writing courses and even help in preparing a publication in their journal? What do you think of publishers who provide writing courses? Well, this is maybe some effort, joint effort that they can do with universities, because this is the main problem with researchers, that they struggle writing papers. So it's something that we have seen for many years in the journal that I was editor-in-chief. Yes, in fact, it's something that also. The problem is that most academics, you graduate from the university, and then if you continue teaching, and or even if you continue in the academia in other ways, and you keep writing papers for publishing, so it's something that most researchers struggle with. Writing is very difficult. It's not as predictable as it is, especially if you are not, let's say you are not well prepared. So the good news is that you can learn the style, you can learn the way of writing, and it's actually kind of doable. However, it's something that I have seen some students, some scholars really struggle. So it takes a while. So it takes some time to them to learn it. So and the best way is if you have some kind of mentor, if publishers can provide this, so it will be great. And I think it will be the best to join efforts with universities and do it together, because it's something that you want to read something well written when you are an editor-in-chief, so sometimes it's very problematic when you don't understand a thing when you're reading a paper, the first paragraph, and you cannot understand something because it sometimes doesn't make sense. So it's very important to know how to do it. So well, I think that it covers mainly all that we have seen this during this conference. I hope that you can still participate in our next conference, because we are very happy to have you in all these conferences. And the events are very important because we know that educating the scholars, researchers, students, universities, and so on, it's a big effort that we are doing together in cooperation with very renowned institutions such as DOAJ, Crossref, and Creative Commons and other important institutions that are always trying to solve your doubts and questions, and trying to give you the best advice in order to have a more clear understanding of what you do. So I think that we will continue doing this next year. We have our last conference. The last conference during this year is on November 15, and it's actually quite important conference because we have invited many editors-in-chief and editorial teams from journals in Latin America. Unfortunately, we don't have some funding to pay the interpreters, so we hope that next year we'll have more money to pay the interpreters, as we did in February, and we will have as well more people. But there are a lot of interest for this conference as well, so we will have a Spanish-speaking audience attendees, and I hope that it will be a good experience for you, and we will as soon as possible provide the translation for our English-speaking audience. So that's something that we do in order to have all the contents in these two languages, and we hope that it's quite reasonable for you to understand. It takes some time to prepare it, so please have some patience, and we will let you know when we have it. And please, if you want, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, OpenCiencia YouTube channel, and you will get the notifications when the conferences are uploaded and available for you to watch in the other language. So thank you all, and I think that it's important to also thank the collaborators, Marlene, Leah, and also the presenters, Tom, Brigitte, and all the ones who helped preparing this conference. It was all the conferences involve a lot of work all the time, so I hope that you enjoy it, and please spread it with your contacts, and I hope that the next ones will be better in terms of the technical issues and difficulties. So I think that it's this one was better than the one in February, so we will make sure that the next one will be better. So thank you all, and I wish you a good day, and see you next month. So thank you, and see you. Bye bye.